It almost feels like magic when we can create a feeling of distance on a thin sheet of paper. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how I paint this scene. I'm going to walk you through it step by step, and along the way, I'm going to share my 3 keys for creating depth within your paintings. The first thing that I do after I lay in the drawing for my scene is I wet down the back and the front of my paper. And that is particularly helpful when we are trying to create a feeling of depth within our paintings. One of the keys is really creating softness in the distance. And the best way to do that is by painting wet into wet. So here in this scene, I laid in some light colors for the distant hill, and I wanted to preserve some of these clouds over here because that was one of the things that really attracted me to this painting. So I left a little bit of that white of the paper behind, and the rest of it I just went ahead and covered, and I'm laying in the light values for this mountain. It's helpful to cover most of the paper as you get started to really lay in those light values across the whole scene first. Now, I'm working wet into wet here, and that is a big part of creating depth, is practicing the timing of wet into wet. How much paint is on your brush, how much water is on your paper. The more that we practice that, the more we get that skill under control and get a feel for the timing, the easier that painting wet into wet is going to be for you. So I have this little cloud popping in over here, and I have these light color clouds here. The lighting was really dynamic at this time of the evening, and I wanted to capture that within this scene. I'm covering all the paper all the way to the bottom, and that's essentially the first wash of the painting, laying in the sky, preserving the clouds, laying in some of the light values for the distant hill and the light value of the ground right here. And that brings us to key number 1 for creating depth. Let's take a look at that. My first tip for creating depth within your paintings is to soften the distance. Texture brings an area forward. Softness lets it recede more into the distance. So if you look at this painting here, I've really softened the distance. There's a little hint of a hard edge, but less is more when it comes to the background of your scene. That is the real challenge because we want to paint everything that we see within the reference photo. But if you can really soften the distance and minimize the background of your painting, you'll be well on your way to creating depth. So after I've initially laid down the light values, the paper is still wet. And so this is a good opportunity to add a little more color, a little more saturation for some of these closer trees. You'll notice that I'm using more of a vibrant green for these trees down here and more of a duller green color for this distance. Adding in a little bit of softness here, working back into the sky a little bit. Now, in this scene, I have a hill that's a little bit closer up, kind of a rock formation that's here. I wanted to show some of that texture. I've been doing this more lately as I've been painting. I'm using a paper towel and just lifting off a little bit of that in that area to create a variety of texture and to lighten up that area as well. So don't be afraid to experiment with different things, different tools, because in the end, it's really just about the painting that is created. So I lifted off some of that to preserve some of the light on the face of what will be that rock formation. My paper is still damp at this point. I'm coming back in with some blue for that distant hill, and I'm dropping that in carefully because if I go in with a fully loaded mop brush, it's going to disrupt the wash that I just left. It's going to flow down the page and it's going to bloom. It's not going to work. So you'll see here I'm using an Escoda size 18 Perla brush. Now that's a synthetic brush. It doesn't hold as much water as say a mop brush. That gives me more control when I'm painting the distance. So I'm dropping in that cool blue color there and carefully laying that in, letting some of those colors merge on the paper, trying to show where the shadow of the clouds is on the side of the mountain. I'm getting down to that area that I dried off with that paper towel. You'll see now I'm starting to get a hard edge in that area, and that's good because that area needs a little more definition than the area back here. So as I hit that drier paper, I'm starting to see some more defined edges. I'm trying to paint this in a really connected way connecting the shadow shape of the background in with some of the greens up here. Essentially, it's the middle values of the painting that I'm getting in this stage. Now, I paint in layers. A lot of artists do with watercolor. And when we paint in layers and we lay in our lights, our middle values, and our darks, it really helps us to create a compelling painting. If you have questions about working in layers and also planning your painting, take a look at my guide that you can get for free down in the description below. So because the paper is still damp, I'm able to take a clean brush and lift off some areas of the cloud. You see I lifted off a little bit there to define that. When things are damp, they're still malleable. We can lift some areas, we can change things. Once everything dries, it becomes a lot more difficult to do that. Now you'll notice that the background has a lot more cool colors, and the middle ground and foreground have a lot more warmth and vibrancy. And that leads me to key number 2 in creating depth. Tip number 2 for creating depth is to cool down the distance. Use more cooler colors for that part of the painting that is further away. And use warmer colors in the middle ground and foreground. That automatically will help you create a feeling of distance. Look how cool these mountains are in this painting. I've really used a lot more cooler colors. Now contrast that with the warmer colors of the grass here, and especially up to here. Even that difference in color temperature makes a big difference in your paintings and can really help you create that feeling of distance. Now that I have the light values in shape, this middle value shape here, I want to work down into the middle ground and into the foreground to keep adding more value and detail. Now I'm using a smaller brush. When we are painting the distance, we're going to need to make some smaller marks. Things are smaller as they get further away into the distance, so I switched brushes. And now I'm getting down here into the middle ground, more of the heart of the painting, and letting this stand as the background. Right now, all the detail and attention is back here, but as I work down into this part of the painting and I get more contrast, harder edges, it's going to let that part of the painting feel closer to us. And we are on our way to creating depth within this scene. Working my way down to the bottom of the painting, I'm dropping in a little more value. I'm back to that Perla size 18 brush, dropping in a little bit more value on the distant hill. And I felt like I needed a little more attention up here on this distant peak. And I'm taking my smaller brush and just trying to create an impression of some of the texture that I'm seeing up in that mountain. But I'm really trying to add enough detail, but not too much to where that's going to really compete with the middle ground and the foreground. At this point, I have let my paper dry, and now I'm ready to focus the painting, get more information here in the middle ground and the foreground to really help this painting read how I want it to read, and let this part just sit into the background. So now I'm starting the process of adding the darks and the details of the scene, and trying to really abstract what I'm doing, not get too caught up in every little tree, every little detail. I'm squinting at the reference photo, and I'm often stepping back to see how my painting is looking. And for this mixture, I'm using raw sienna and cobalt turquoise is my main mixture for my greens here. And so once I have that in place, now I can pull in some of the darks and get more of that information here in the middle ground. And it's amazing, once you do this, once you start adding more texture here, that background starts to recede into the distance. And that brings me to my third tip for creating depth. Tip number 3, use texture strategically. Really think about how you use texture in your paintings. Now, when I'm talking about texture, I'm talking about marks like this, where it's almost a dry brush mark, and you're using the side of your brush and creating more texture. Texture brings this area of the middle ground and foreground closer to us. And when you have less texture, such as in this background hill, and especially this hill in the distance, then you let those areas recede in the distance, and the texture that you use brings this area closer to us. If I had included all the texture that I could see on this hill or even in this distant hill, then I would lose that sense of depth and the background would be competing with the middle ground and the foreground. So be strategic in how you use texture in your scenes. Here I'm taking my time looking at the painting, adding more texture, more information. And one thing I realized was I felt like this rock formation was had a little too much contrast. So I'm gonna do a little wash over that to take away some of the contrast and help it have a little bit of less attention going to that part of the painting. It's always a balance when we're trying to add additions, and once you add something, you see the scene in a different way. So then you might need to change something elsewhere. And I felt like one more time, I needed a little more bit of detail to show the importance of the peak of that mountain. Really, that was one of the main reasons why I took this photo, is because I just loved how that looked with the cloud behind it, and I thought it needed just a little bit more information. Again, we're back to that walking that fine line of including information and not overworking an area, because we do want this to sit in the background and not compete with what's going on here in the middle ground and in the foreground. And I added a little bit more information there. Now I'm assessing the whole scene. What parts of the painting need a little bit more attention, a little bit more detail? And this is always a tricky part because you don't want to overwork the painting, but you want to finish it and complete it and allow the different areas of the scene to read how you want them to. I'm adding a little more value on this tree here and adding a few little touches, little bits of shadows, little bits of detail. And there is a look at the final painting. I hope that this look into my process for creating depth is helpful for you. If we can soften the distance, if we can cool down the distance, and then be strategic in how we use texture in our paintings, we can create a great feeling of depth within our scenes. If you have more questions about my painting process, take a look at this. Have you ever been really excited about a painting and you get all set up, you find that right reference that you're excited about, and then it's time to go and you feel lost? I have a free resource that I want to give to you today that can help with these problems. My 5 steps to plan a successful watercolor painting. I walk you through the crucial planning phase of your painting that will help you understand what you're going to paint first, second, and third. The planning is really so important, especially in watercolor. This medium is harder to correct. It's so immediate. So having that plan is very important. I send you a PDF that you can download. And the great thing about this is you can have it on your phone. You could print it out. You can download this right now before you start your next painting. All you have to do is follow this link here and download my 5-step guide to planning a successful watercolor painting.